Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 News. New information emerging over the last 24 hours as to exactly what was behind this major cheating scandal that apparently emerged during the Brazilian Grand Prix weekend. Red Bull alleged that McLaren were injecting water into their tyres in order to keep their temperatures down and enable them to run longer stints with lower tyre degradation. This seemed to be relatively unfounded, but now a new apparent piece of evidence has come to light to explain exactly what this is all about and whether McLaren were doing exactly that. Because if they were, with that potential explain the major fall-off they saw at the Brazilian Grand Prix. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate these points. By the way, over the last 10 races, Lando has scored the most, Charles Leclerc has scored the second most, Max Verstappen has scored the third most over the last 10 rounds, but that has not mattered in the grand scheme of things because Max is just about to confirm his title win, it seems, over the next couple of weekends. Now, big news on Audi. Rumour has it that, yes, Audi has bought Sauber and will very surely own, I believe, 100% of Sauber effectively. But it's not just the Saudis that are interested in getting involved in the world of Formula 1, because apparently Qatar, they're getting in the mix as well. An article here from Toby Gruner saying that according to their information, that's AMUS, usually very reliable on stuff like this. And of course, these were also the guys to report on the cheating scandal. Not saying that it was happening, but just saying, look, this is what Red Bull are saying. And, that side was pretty much guaranteed because Horner said shortly afterwards, oh, no comment, don't want to talk about that. But obviously it's been talked about behind the scenes. That cheating drama we'll get to in a few minutes time, but as Toby Gruner says, Qatar's sovereign wealth funds is set to buy a minority stake in the Audi F1 team. Talks have been ongoing for months. Audi won't give up control of the team, but will get fresh money for investments in whatever they want to do. So very interesting that Audi are going to buy the team and then pretty much immediately sell it for, well, sell part of it anyway for a significant amount of money. I think McLaren, haven't they done that with like Bahrain, right? So there's lots of interest we know from the Middle East, right? And we've got Saudi involvement heavily in Aston Martin. Rumours that they might look to just take over that team fully over the next few years. I don't know, what Lawrence Stroll's appetite would be to actually make that happen. But now we're talking about the same thing with Audi as well. So makes for an interesting time in F1. Whether that's good or bad is another question. Speaking of these various countries, Argentina has been on the news lately in Formula 1 because Franco Colapinto is back on the grid. The busloads of fans that are up there to Brazil to watch him race and unfortunately watch him have a pretty challenging weekend. However, his likelihood of getting into a car is reasonably substantial, especially because of the benefits he does provide. Not just does he seem like a solid driver with good pace, good improvement and ability to learn as well, but also he's just massive in that region, right? It's like the Checo Perez effect. In some ways, he has kept that seat at Red Bull because he sells a load of t-shirts. I mean, Max Verstappen might be the greatest driver on the planet right now, and is immensely popular, but Checo sells more t-shirts in Mexico and in South America and stuff like that. I think it's like 70% of their sales come from Mexico, Red Bull, in terms of merchandise. Like, that's a big deal. But if you're Red Bull and there's massive passion in that part of the world, bringing on Colapinto from Argentina, of course, also a country with rich motorsport heritage. Fangio, of course, was Argentinian, but not had a Formula 1 driver really for quite some time, at least on a decent level. It's a prospect, right? You say, look, maybe we lose Perez, but we might gain some other assets in that, in South America. Obviously, Mexico, not South America, as Helmut Marko said a while ago, but you know what I'm saying, right? In those types of domains, and even Colapinto currently says, look, South Americans pursuing F1, the prospect of getting better. And of course, we know that Bortoleto, Brazilian driver, he's getting the drive over at Sauber for the upcoming season at Audi, basically. Now, the Colapinto situation continues to gain some strength over the last couple of days, with James Vowles saying that Williams have what he describes as a reasonably long contract. So, that might be 2 years or something like that under his name. Now, of course, the longer the contract, the higher the buyout, theoretically, right? And I think that's what Vowles is getting at, because we believe that negotiations right now are still very much so ongoing, probably between Red Bull and Williams, because Alpine apparently are interested too, but if Red Bull are serious, I think Red Bull will be the ones to get the deal done, I would imagine. But, maybe Flavio Briatore, now with control of Alpine, manages to convince whoever, Luca Di Maio, to put down some serious, maybe unnecessary cash to get Colapinto into the team. We're talking $20 million to get Colapinto out of that contract. That's the present rumour. That's a big deal, given that, Colapinto's salary salary you give him is not going to be anywhere near $20 million. So, Williams might be cooking up a masterclass, but that's kind of what Vowles is getting across. He's saying publicly, look, we've got a long contract, we're not going to be so easy to let Colapinto go, give us more money if you want to sign him, is kind of the implication there. But his management have talked about the fact that there's so many people, so many teams, so much interest in Colapinto. I'm sure that he's getting offers as well from other motorsport series, which may not be, he wants to be in F1, obviously, but after just a couple of races, I'm sure that there were various teams in all sorts of disciplines reaching out to see if they could get a signature. Of course, number one is going to be the option at F1 with various teams. The most likely candidate probably still remains RB, because Sauber aren't getting him. We know they're getting Bortoletto instead. And where are the other options? I mean, there just aren't any left on the grid right now. It's only Red Bull or RB. So, if he's very likely to secure a seat because there's so much interest from so many parties, the only available seats are somewhere in the Red Bull family. And that is the big question right now. Liam Lawson currently occupies one of those. Thought this is kind of funny. I think that he said this as a joke, but I know that Liam Lawson, he's quite an interesting character, isn't he? Like, he's quite, he definitely has a personality which will rub people the wrong way. It already has with Alonso and with Perez over the last couple of weekends. In my opinion, it is a personality that is conducive to staying on the Formula 1 grid if you make friends in the right places, even if you piss some other people off. So, some people like him, some people don't, and I think that's probably fine. But he said the following: it makes no sense. It's a New Zealand team, because of course founded by Bruce McLaren, a New Zealander. The name is still McLaren. It's complete BS that the UK, like the, God Save the King, right, is played for McLaren. Now, the reality is it's not really, because, okay, sure, yeah, New Zealand team founded by Bruce McLaren, but based now basically entirely out of the UK, and also there are two official national anthems, I think, for New Zealand, one of which is, like, I don't know if it's something Save New Zealand, anyway, I don't know if it's God Save New Zealand, something like that anyway, and then God Save the King is another official anthem, so technically it is the New Zealand anthem, kind of, that they're playing it when McLaren win or whatever. But so I think this is a joke, but I still thought it was kind of funny, so I thought I'd mention it. Now, speaking of the driver market, Damon Hill has continued to, continue his tirade against Red Bull on some level. You know that he talked about Max Verstappen after Mexico, saying that he was like Dick Dastardly or whatever, and his driving standards are atrocious. He talks about Carlos Sainz very highly, Damon Hill. Sometimes I think he goes too far in his kind of the compliments he gives to Sainz compared to Leclerc, but he does say this: he is a thorough professional, he is thoroughly professional. I take it as a compliment that he didn't get into Red Bull, which is a pretty funny statement, right? It's basically saying, like, Red Bull are a deeply unserious, unprofessional organisation with all sorts of drama from top to bottom. The fact that Sainz isn't there is actually a testament to him that, his professionality didn't fit into their structure. Now, is that really true? I don't know. I think the reality is that Sainz Senior and Jos Verstappen, their friction in the past, and maybe the feeling of not wanting Max to have a teammate who might be significantly more competitive, has changed their mind. But look, if Christian Horner could change his mind and he could decide today what he could have decided months ago and given Sainz the seat at Red Bull, would he do it? I think he'd be very tempted to do it. I think maybe he was expecting, for some reason, Perez to have a turnaround in performance, which has simply not at all materialised. One quick update on Mercedes. They did try and explain why they left Russell out when he asked, or why they brought him in when he asked to be let out, basically. And it's, Hamilton's obviously sitting there thinking this team's a shambles, although he won't say so publicly, obviously. But, Russell was talking about this during the Grand Prix. He was like, hey, don't bring me in, this is going to go red. And after they did bring him in, it went red. Russell was like, I said it, guys, why didn't you just listen to me? So Andrew Shovlin mentioned this in kind of the post-race debrief and says, with hindsight, you would manage most races differently, but certainly in this case we would have done. One of the key things is once they announced that the VSC was ending, we had a very, very short window, only a couple of seconds, where we could have got George to stay out on the track, which they might have done, but making that call in that period was a challenge. The reason you would have done that is because by that point you're going to suffer a full pit loss stop, like basically stop loss anyway. You might as well stay out and gamble on the fact that it's quite likely someone would have a crash as happens and they're forced to red flag it. So, but prior to that, stopping to us made sense because Lando was coming in, George was able to do that. So, it's an interesting one because Mercedes effectively were looking to cover off Lando, right? Which is understandable, but I think the risk is, and this is the risk that I think they had to realise, is that Max was always going to do what he did. Red Bull don't make mistakes in those scenarios, neither does Max. The comms on the radio between Max and GP were very good. And I think Mercedes, a million times out of a million, Max is staying out there waiting for the red flag because that's his chance to win the race. And we knew that Max probably had the best pace on the track. So I think, Mercedes covering Lando's strategy, I get it. But equally, I think they had to realise that, they were also trying to cover other drivers. From them, they thought, oh, well, if we stay ahead of Lando, we win the race. That was not clear at all. And I think that's what Mercedes failed to recognise in the Grand Prix, that someone was always going to benefit from a red flag if it happened, which was very likely at the time. So just because you get ahead of Lando and you beat him, well done, you beat Lando, that didn't win you the race. And I think that was the kind of decision that maybe Mercedes overlooked in this scenario. Obviously, on the other side of the garage, Hamilton's been going through a more difficult time at Mercedes, and it will be fascinating next year at Ferrari, because I think what Bernie Ecclestone says here on that dynamic is probably on the money to some degree, right? Hamilton will likely be at Ferrari for fewer years than Leclerc will. Leclerc is not going to be usurped as the golden child at Ferrari, right? Il Presidentato, or whatever they call him over there, the predestined, which is the hardest nickname of all time, to be honest. So, Hamilton coming in, will he be able to beat Leclerc? Sure, I think it's possible. I think they're going to be a mega driver lineup, and who would I predict out of the two of them would win the championship if they both had a competitive car? Right now, incredibly difficult to call, I would say, between the pair of them. I'd probably still lean Hamilton's way just on pure experience alone, and I think in terms of consistency, he could probably outfox Leclerc, but, I'd expect Leclerc to probably outqualify Hamilton over the course of the season, so there's that to keep in mind as well. But it's not like Leclerc is going to be brushed aside for Hamilton. Hamilton's going to have to get his way in there on some level, and I think Ecclestone's probably right on that, so it's going to be a challenge for both parties next year. But the big challenge for Red Bull is trying to prove that McLaren have actually done something untoward over the last few rounds. So Red Bull proposed during the Brazilian Grand Prix weekends that there was some sort of big drama happening in the paddock. So Toby Gruner said the following: there is another storm brewing in the paddock. Red Bull suspects that McLaren and a few other teams are filling water into their tyres to prevent them from overheating during the race. Now, there was some discussion on this from Formula Uno, Giuliano De Chessa, over the last couple of days that implied that a single milliliter of water in the tyres can keep the temperature 10 degrees cooler than would otherwise be expected. Now, apparently the only way that Red Bull knew this is because they were experimenting with this a few years ago before the FIA officially outlawed it. And so, Red Bull were already, trying to find ways years ago to circumvent these potential rules, but then the rules came in and nobody does that anymore, apparently. And then Red Bull were like, well, some of our engineers have gone to join other teams. They took that knowledge with them. They could be using it to their advantage if they found a way to do it without getting caught. That was the idea. So Red Bull basically came out and said that McLaren and others, they didn't say this publicly, but Christian Horner has heavily implied it, because when he was asked the question, Horner then said, oh, well, no comment on that one. So, this is happening. Whether there's any evidence for it, whether there's actually cheating going on, I'm not particularly convinced. Certainly I wasn't at the time, and I'm not really now. But there is some evidence that apparently has come to light on the situation. So the FIA investigated it and basically said that they haven't found any evidence of this. No evidence that the teams are doing it. No evidence of any tampering in play. But the latest article coming out on this today said the following. So, reports over the Brazilian Grand Prix weekends says that the teams were benefiting from adding a small amount of water into their tyres via valves for cooling purposes. Red Bull are said to be well versed in the practice, having previously employed it themselves before it was outlawed by an FIA technical directive some years ago. We know that the Pirellis, they do like to overheat. Now, of course, at the Singapore Grand Prix, that was, in many respects, Norris's most dominant weekends. Yes, Max still did very well in terms of damage limitation there, but on the medium tyres, Norris was a second a lap quicker than Max. It was pretty outrageous. The pace advantage was mega. On the hards, Norris finally slowed down because he realised if he pushes as hard as he did on the mediums, he was going to bid it in the wall, which he nearly did on a couple of occasions. So, therefore, this result raised questions from Red Bull. They were like, how is it possible that Lando is a second a lap faster than us on pure pace? That should not be possible. So they tried to find a reason, and apparently this is what they spotted. Red Bull presumably spotted that McLaren was alleged to have been spotted with water and watermarks seen inside some rims after tyres had been stripped at Pirelli's base post-race in Singapore. The report adds it's understood that the FIA inspected tyres and rims closely at the Brazilian Grand Prix to see if there was any evidence of extra moisture, but nothing was found. So, apparently Red Bull, they were looking at McLaren's tyres after the Singapore Grand Prix, Norris's tyres, and they were saying, oh, looks like there might be a bit of water there. Now, that could be from numerous sources, I guess, but that's what Red Bull suggested, and clearly it was becoming a point of conversation in the paddock that this might have been happening. And of course, look, they turn up to Brazil and they don't have a competitive weekend, really. I mean, they won the sprint, but and they won 2 to the sprint. They were 1-2 on the grid, but obviously in the race it was a different story. Now that was partially due to Piastri's poor qualifying, right? He didn't have the greatest time there, and then Norris did, but wasn't able to execute in those conditions. Now, we're not going to see whether this is true until really the next couple of races, because the wet conditions in Brazil, it's like, how do you read into overheating tyres in those conditions when, it's raining and the temperatures are all over the place? You cannot read into the fact that McLaren weren't as good in Brazil and say, oh, it's down to the fact that they were cheating before with the tyres, putting water in them. That's not clear at all on one race. And, McLaren say they just, didn't really get the setup right and stuff like this on a difficult sprint weekends. So, intrigued to your thoughts in the comments below. This theory on the evidence that Red Bull brought to the table here on why they've been cheating doesn't seem super concrete to me, or watertight, I guess one might say to me. But intrigued to your thoughts in the comments. Just one final thing to mention here. Aston Martin are hoping that they can turn the ship around. They say that next year's data is positive, but wow, it's been a bit of a shambles. Adrian Newey certainly has a challenge on his hands. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.